So Faith on the Journey was the first. This was the initial ministry that I started, and I'm grateful that you remember that and have that down, because you were a big part of my journey. But we'll talk about that later. But yes, that was related to Faith on the Journey, the counseling, the trauma healing groups. All of that is the healing ministry that I have built. But I've created a sub-arm company called Women in the Ministry, taking the lessons that I've learned over the last 6 years in building my own ministry. I wanted to help women to do the same, to do what they feel like God is calling them to, and also just help them discern their call, because that could be very difficult. Like, you might be called to do ministry, but what does ministry look like? How do I serve people? How do I get the training? Just a lot of questions, right? And I remember my journey with that and the role that you played in helping me. I don't know if I should get into that now, but you did play a major role in helping me with some decisions and pivots. And I want to be able to be that for other people, to help them to be able to move forward.
Do you have a step-by-step process somewhere, like a something on your website or some kind of material together that you could, I don't know if you give it out freely or you sell like an ebook or something like that, but maybe that'll be a nice reference for us in the show notes for this episode.
I do.
I did another episode recently with somebody, a friend of mine. She's a kind of similar to what I do. She's kind of a marketing jack of all trades. Just does like SEO and pay-per-click and web design for a handful of clients. And I was talking to her after the show, and I was like, it might be a good idea for us to put together like a guide, like some kind of a step-by-step formula for all the way from the basics of how to start the LLC and get the EIN and like get a bank account and that kind of stuff, to the website, making content, charging people for your services or for your product, whatever it might be. So, I don't know. Maybe we could talk about that for a minute. I don't know if you, it's a very huge amount of stuff to break down into like a 5-minute summary, but, it sounds like you maybe do that regularly or have done that many times. What did that process look like for you? 'Cause one of the things I want to talk to you about is I've seen a little bit of your face on your website. I don't know if you're doing that many videos or podcasts or what it is, but I wanted to get some input from you on marketing content through, podcasts, videos, that kind of thing. So maybe we can talk about your specific process with all that first, and then we can get into how anyone could sort of kind of replicate the process and sort of do these things that you teach.
So I started my company off without clarity on the direction of the company. So I actually filed my company as a media company back in 2018 when it first got started. That's very funny to me because now we are far from like a media company, but I didn't have clarity at the time. So I established it as an LLC media company. I was going to do all these videos that encourage people around healing and God's love. But over time, it evolved. I started doing a blog, weekly blog on how God's faithfulness helped people to heal from trauma. And that developed into a book that evolved into that. And then eventually that same year, I started my own podcast. I kept the blogging going, but I started interviewing people on their testimony of how they heal from trauma and God brought them through difficult times. That started back in 2019. And then the Lord introduced me to a woman who was a master facilitator with the Trauma Healing Institute. And that's essentially Bible studies to help people heal from trauma. Once I was exposed to that curriculum, I absolutely loved it. I was like, this is it. And so I started doing groups locally. And then it spread to nationally. I started working with different people. And then from there, I realized I wanted to start a Christian counseling practice. And that's kind of how things evolved. But with that, the structure of actually coming up with my pricing model and the services and figuring out how I was going to market, all of that required me to do the 4 steps that I teach women, which is my framework. That required, the first step is discernment. Discerning where your focus is, who you want to serve, how you want to serve them, what makes you unique, what needs are you meeting, who do you need to connect with. This discernment phase is critical. I usually ask people 3 questions to help them in their discerning process. And I write about this in my book. When you're trying to think about your focus, asking what cause burdens you. So is there a particular issue that you see in society that you're like, I am bothered by this. Someone needs to do something about this. And typically that someone is you. Another question I typically ask is, what gifts do you have that you want to use in this world to make a difference? And then the last question I usually ask is who's your audience? Who's your tribe? Who's your community? The people who you're drawn to? Maybe it's a younger version of yourself. So in that, I talk about the discernment phase, and this is something that's a cycle because we're consistently taking time to reflect and discern. But then over time, the next phase, the next step is equipping yourself for the work through training, through coaching, through having systems and learning new processes and learning how to market, learning how to create a business plan, learning all these elements, because you might have a specialty area. You might have certifications around trauma healing or some other focus, but that doesn't necessarily mean you know how to run a business. It doesn't mean that you know how to do some of these other aspects that's essential for you to be successful. So equipping is step 2. Then step 3 is plan. From a faith perspective, we hear about write the vision, make it plain. Just because you're doing this work for the Lord doesn't mean that you just go out here willy-nilly without a plan. We need a plan. How do we craft the vision, have clear, smart goals? We talk about that. And then lastly, the final step in the ministry development cycle is implementation. This is where a lot of people get stuck, particularly those who are perfectionists, recovering perfectionists. They want everything to be just right before they implement. And I encourage people to take imperfect action to get things done so you can learn from it, you can evaluate it, and then, adjust. So that's my process with everything. It's going through this cycle, and it goes right back to discernment, because you look at what did I learn from that implementation? How can I do this better? Who do I need to align myself with to grow and go to that next level? And so for me, that's my life. I'm constantly going through that cycle, and I walk other women through that.
That's a really good layout. I like that a lot, because you're right. There's definitely a sort of intimidating, what do I do kind of feeling you get with, starting a business. You want to use your gifts in some way. You want to serve the world in some way, but you don't know exactly how to turn it into something tangible that people can find, something that you can also earn a living off of, and that kind of thing. With your site specifically, with your presence, did you find that regular blog posting served you well? Like, one of the things that I'm doing right now with this podcast, as it's sort of new, is I'm just reminding myself that content marketing is a very surefire method to get somewhere, even if it doesn't seem that way at first. Like, just doing something, like anything, repeating any process as a habit, as like a discipline, every single day, every single week, every single month, whatever it might be, and just saying, like you said, one post a week, do that consistently, or like in my case, like, a podcast episode as often as I can, but just like putting that content out there into the world, and of course getting it sort of, formatted correctly for search engines to index it and that kind of thing. It will yield people finding you in some way or another. And then not only are they finding you organically through Google or YouTube or Spotify or like whatever the platform is that they're using, you can also use that to your advantage too when you continue talking to people and networking and that kind of thing, because you can say, here's my website, and I've got an article that I wrote about that, just for you, or I've got an episode about that I think that you would find some value in. You've got like your own assets basically that can you can give to other people, like when you meet them and say, like, go and check this out, as opposed to trying to convince them that you're worth the money or worth the time, or that you're some kind of a big deal. You can just sort of show them like your stuff, and then like you kind of let the assets do the talking for you, kind of 24/7. So that's definitely a good approach.
I agree. I've seen that to be true, Paul, particularly with the blogging. It's sometimes funny for me to look back and be like, wow, that blog one blog I looked back, I was like, oh, that has over 1,000 hits. That's cool, or when I always ask people, I'm a big fan of data now. It drives my decision. So every time I get a new client inquiry, I ask them, where did you hear about us? And I have all the different funnels. I have blog, podcast, Pinterest, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on. And it's very interesting when I hear someone say, I was up in the middle of the night. I was struggling with XYZ issue and I found your blog post and I booked an appointment. And I'm like, that shows that it's working. And similarly speaking with my podcast, there was one point where I was very consistent. I just recently took a break, but I think I did about 50 episodes out of the whole year, like once a week. I was releasing, only taking a break for Christmas. And when I had that consistency, even though I might not have had the numbers that were astronomical, what it did was it gave me brand authority. Constantly me doing episodes on this particular topic, people would introduce me in spaces and say, hey, Jocelyn, she does trauma healing work, blah, blah, blah. They know my little business card. So I don't even have to do it because I've been consistently in front of people's faces so they can tell I wasn't just a one fly-by-night type thing. So yes, consistency pays off, but with the intentionality behind it, Paul, because when I first started blogging, I was just kind of blogging just randomness. I wasn't really clear. So that's why everything was random. But when every blog post I put out had a method to the madness, it was very intentional. It had a clear call to action. As you mentioned, I was very clear about SEO and trying to make sure my meta tags were where they needed to be so that people have been finding me organically versus me having to pay for a service for that. And it's very cool. It's the long game, though. And that's the thing. It's nothing quick and fast about that. But when you play that long game to rank well in your area, particularly with our lovely Google, it pays.
Yeah. Yeah. We call that in the SEO biz, we call that topical authority. And that's something that I try to establish with my clients and just let them know, hey, we're gonna basically write content about these topics for a little while until Google starts to rank you for just those keywords. And then we're going to move on to kind of the next thing that you do. But yeah, that definitely is how it works from an organic point of view. How did you come up with your topics to write about then? Was it just stuff that sort of came off the top of your head, or did you find common, question and answer sites, or did you do some kind of keyword research yourself? How did you decide kind of what to write about in the beginning like that and still today?
In the beginning, it was getting to know my avatar, my ideal client, studying them, hearing some of the struggles. I did focus groups and interviews with people to see about pricing and their needs, and spending time with different people. It helped me to kind of see common themes. And I think there's a benefit in doing actual face-to-face with your ideal clients to hear directly from them versus third-party information. And of course, there's other research and things that I did, maybe a little bit of keyword research, but I've spent time over the years getting to know my client and what they need so we can best serve them. And that helped me to be able to speak to them, where literally it got to the point where there would be times in which I would write my own copy, my own marketing materials, I'll say, for people. And when they would get an email, they'd be like, man, it was like you were speaking directly to me. And I was like, yes, that's what I'm talking about. I'm hitting it now, Right. And this was before ChatGPT, right? Now, ChatGPT I have embraced. It's super cool. I know you can have ChatGPT learn your voice and language and stuff. And I've embraced it now. I've delegated some of the blog writing to my assistant who leverages AI. But sometimes I like to just have the old school. I'm like, AI can't beat me on this copy. I'm gonna write this because I know my people, So it's fun. It is what it is. AI can do some good copy, but I at first I feel like even if AI can write this sales copy for you, you still have to know your avatar. You still need to know them well enough to say, beyond the written form. If I'm meeting with them, if I'm doing a workshop with them, I need to be speaking to their soul so that they know that this is for them. And so that takes time being with your people and being clear. And I think that was the problem initially. When you're trying to reach everyone, you reach no one with your marketing materials. You really do have to have a certain person in mind so that they know, yes, this is for me.
It's funny, yeah, the GPT stuff, it is definitely coming in handy quite a bit. I'm tempted right now to start putting like a little, like, you know how like on blog posts and different articles on websites, you'll see like a little disclaimer at the top that says, in this post, I have some affiliate links. So if you buy something through one of these links, I might get like a compensation of some kind. Mm-hmm. I'm tempted to start putting a little disclaimer at the top of mine in parentheses or like in small font that says, this post was written by a human. Because
I like that.
Like every day that passes, more and more of like the marketing stuff and just like the content is being just created by these robots, by these AIs. And it's like, well, I agree with what you just said. There's something that the AI will never be able to do, and that is to have that like deep personality and that deep kind of, you know, understanding of people, but also just like portraying, I want to say like emotion. Like I doubt the AI is ever going to, like it can use like certain adjectives and certain words, but I think it's never going to be able to sort of like, you think about like some of the best, like, I don't want to say best storytellers of all time, but like, I think about like some of the fiction writers of our era, and like one of the ones that comes to mind for me is like there's a dude from the UK. I think his name is Neil Gaiman. He's kind of like he's like a fiction writer, like, you know, fiction, horror, fantasy. He's kind of like a Stephen King, but like maybe not as much of like the totally weird, gruesome horror, just like a little more fantasy-esque. But he has a very, very distinct style to like the way he writes his stories and the words that he uses that like people begin to recognize about him. So like that kind of thing, like that true like voice that you have inside, that's just like your way of writing the words, or like if you're like a musician, like, you know, writing like the verses and the lyrics and that kind of thing. I doubt that the AIs are ever going to like fully, you know, like be able to do that kind of thing. So yeah, like I said, it'll be interesting to see how people use it and abuse it as we continue to watch it all grow.
Yes, for sure. For sure. I agree with you. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, humans always are going to prefer to work with another human. Yes, I can. Well, most people, maybe some introverts prefer to work with a robot, but most people, you know, prefer like a human interaction. Even like if you're like calling customer service, for example, I would like to talk to a human versus that doggone touch tone. Stop sending me to the next prompt. I want a human on the line, right? And so, yes, automation can help, but we like that human touch.
At what point after you launched did you start the podcast? You said you were writing blog posts for a little while. Was it like, were those the only two forms of content that you did? Are you doing any videos? And sorry, there's a lot of questions here. Are you finding all the guests and having them on your show, or are you like acting as a guest on other people's shows? If you had to kind of summarize like the big picture for like the content marketing that you've done and how you've grown from just like that discipline of one a week or one a day, whatever it is, you know, all the way up to getting traffic and getting clients, or, you know, getting revenue. You know, like what kinds of things in total were you kind of like stacking? Like what was like your content marketing stack?
Yeah, it progressed over time. I wish I could say I was very strategic, but I think one of my blessings and curses, if you will, is that I'm a creative and I can just jump and start some new stuff, not even doing a whole bunch of research. So I just started blogging randomly. I was like, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do to start marketing. It was one of those things. And then wrote my book. You know, that was a process, and that was a dream I had for a long time. So the book kind of gave some brand authority. But the podcast was something where I was just like, hey, I think I'm going to start a podcast. Random. Didn't know even much about podcasting. And I wasn't all official like you. Paul, this a true story. This is such a hot mess. I literally was like, okay, I'm going to get an account on freeconferencecall.com, and I'm going to call my girlfriend up and hit the record button. And we're in this like huge room in my seminary school where I'm interviewing her, where, you know, huge rooms is like terrible sound quality. I did not know what I was doing, but I started. And I laugh at that story because I'm someone who will start And I think that's the benefit of me not overthinking and just starting it with like it not being perfect. But then as I got into it, I was like, oh, okay. My brother saw how bootleg my setup was and he sent me a Yeti. And so I got my first mic, and then, I was like, okay, I can edit this, and okay, I shouldn't be in a big room. Let me get a small room. And the episode 1 versus episode 100, vastly different. But it was an evolution, so doing the podcast, people started, again, that the podcast, I think 2 things that it did for me from a content creation standpoint. First, it's, again, brand recognition. Secondly, it helped me to level up in my field because I get to interview amazing people. It was fun. So I enjoyed that. And I was able to recycle that content for different things because that's the thing. If we put out a blog post, you can use that in multiple ways for social media. You can use that for purposes of SEO traffic. You can recycle that into a possible podcast post. You want to think about how can you recycle your content, and so it has a longer shelf life. And so that was helpful for me. Another thing that I've used for content creation is webinars and masterclasses. Doing regular webinars have brought me business because if I bring the fire for a workshop and people are really impressed by it, then they're like, oh yeah, let me see what she has that I can sign up for. So that is a huge part of the strategy. And then as of lately, I've also been optimizing Facebook ads. I've been using that as a way with my lead magnet, which is a huge piece of the process, which leads people to my email list, which I will, pat myself on the back. I've been very consistent with my email marketing. Once a week, people hear from me. And I've heard people say, Jocelyn, I don't always open up your emails, but I love your subject headers. And sometimes those subject headers are so compelling, I earmark it and say, I'm going to come back to that later. But that's the thing about email marketing. The goal is not to get people to open up every single email. Is to stay in front of mind so when they do need counseling or something hits them at a point in their life when they're ready, you got it. You cultivated them. And so being consistent in front of people's faces, when they think of trauma healing from a Christian perspective, they're going to think of me because I've been in your inbox every week.
What are you using for a lead magnet?
So I have a couple free offerings. For those women who desire to start their ministry, I have a ministry launch starter kit, which is something that complements my book, Sister Start Your Ministry. But I offer this starter kit that has just basic tools, templates, resources to help you to have a framework for starting your ministry. So I give that away for free, and that's available at my website, sisterstartyourministry.com. In addition to that, same website, women can also join my 21-day ministry launch challenge, where I'm walking them through the steps of starting their ministry with a devotional over several days. That's a free lead magnet as well. And then for churches, I created a robust trauma healing church guide. And that trauma healing church guide walks them through just key basic steps for them to become a trauma-informed care congregation. It has resources, referral guides, a number of different things that's very useful for faith communities. So these particular lead magnets, I put a lot of time into it to make sure that it was valuable for people so that they can start using it and get a taste of what I could offer them beyond just this free offering.
Yeah, exactly. That's in my opinion the best kind of lead magnet, the one that is actually that offers real value that somebody can use. It's not just like a gimmick to get them to sign up to your email list. It's like, oh, I could have paid you a few dollars for the quality of this content here. I can use it right now. So that's the best way to make those for sure. A couple of quick questions came to mind. So what kind of microphone do you have right there that you're using right now?
Yeah.
Is that the Yeti, or is that a different one?
This is a different one. I upgraded this particular microphone a couple years ago when I recorded my own audio book. And I can't even remember the fancy name of this microphone. My sound engineer was like, order this soundboard, order blah, blah. I'm like, okay, cool. Just send me the Amazon link. And I paid a pretty penny for this, but it's worth it because now, again, when I write a new book, I can record my own audiobook from home. And I have other equipment on top of that where I have an eyeball that I can put around this microphone to make it where it sounds like a sound studio. When I really want to be just audio only focused, I can use that eyeball as a pop filter, as like just a completely like soundproof room type effect. Is amazing. So this is something, again, over the years, talking to other podcasters, other people in the space, you just learn certain equipment that you need if you're taking your craft seriously.
I got like a decent one for this, what I'm doing right now. I mean, it's like sitting here on an arm in my desk, but it was like a $50 Amazon, kind of a cheap little microphone, but it does sound better than like a headset. It sounds better than the microphone being in your webcam, that kind of thing. But I've been looking at like the Yetis and the Sures and some of the more expensive brands, and I'm like, I need to figure out what the like premier microphone is, so that like when I get this podcast going, for sure I'm gonna do what you did and make all the necessary upgrades and take it seriously.
For sure. Yeah, this was my upgraded mic when I proved to myself that I was actually serious about podcasting. I think there's a phase where you should not start a podcast investing in the mic that I have right now. You should start with the $50 mic and then go from there. So, but I will share the mic that I'm using now.
And you do the audio for the audiobooks yourself, you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I recorded from home with the help of a producer, a sound engineer who he will do some testing with me to make sure my sound quality and my levels are okay on my soundboard. And then after that, I started, recording my book, and they do the post-editing production. I send it over to them. And then, yes, we upload it to Amazon and the other providers to be able to sell. So I did that for my first book, and I'm going to do that for my second book at some point. But it's nice to be able to do this in the comfort of your home. You just need a small room, padded, good microphone, and you can absolutely make it happen. Or you invest in the eyeball that I'll also include in my show notes that creates that soundproof sound quality that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's very cool. That'll be that's definitely a nice way for anyone who doesn't want to go through the effort of putting all the sound paneling on their walls and, making an acoustic setup in your home or your office or whatever. It's a nice way to kind of have that high quality audio without the extra hassle and the expenses and everything.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
How do you find your guests for your podcast?
As of late, I've had so many people pitch me, and I'm sitting here saying like, oh, I'm off season right now. But I get a lot of people approaching me now because I have been consistent for quite some time. Then there's also other platforms like Podmatch or Matchmaker.fm, which are great platforms for networking for podcasters, for hosts who are looking for guests and guests who are looking for hosts. So that's like a matchmaking site for podcasting. I found that to be helpful, although I've noticed that certain people work the circuit and it's kind of the same people in that same pool. I like finding guests who touch on topics that are important to me. For example, I might read a person's book and be like, I want to interview them. And I reach out to them, and typically they say yes. And it's very cool to be able to reach out to an author or someone who you admire and invite them to be a guest on your show and have a conversation with them. And it's recorded, and you're enjoying it because you're passionate about your subject. And it's something where it's a win-win. And for me, while I was going through a very difficult transition in my life where I was also seeking healing from trauma, although the interview was for my audience, the interview was for me too. I was learning, I was growing, it was helping me with my healing process. So it's a blessing to be able to have a show like that even if no one else listens, you like your show is the bomb. Like you're like, this is great. Right. I love my show.
And I also assume that you probably get a lot more, and maybe this is something that you coach people on in your process, you probably get more yes answers than you would think. I think a lot of people feel like they're intimidated by like reaching out to like that author, like that so-and-so, like that special person. But there's a guy, Tim Ferriss is a pretty popular podcaster. He's got a couple of books out. I mean, for a long time, he's had like the 4-Hour Work Week, and he's got a book now called Tools of Titans. But he talks about like in the beginning, he was like, you know what? I just had to suck it up and say, I'm just going to contact this person over and over again until they say yes, and just like email them, contact form on their website, like call their secretary, whatever it might be. But just like, don't be afraid to like at least attempt to reach out to that person who you think would be a good guest to interview, because they might just say yes right away, or they might say like, you know, thanks for the invite, but now's not a good time in my life, whatever it might be. And maybe you come back to them, you know, down the road and they say yes finally. But I would just advise people, as I'm sure you would too, to not be afraid of that initial, that ask. Like,
Yeah, I completely agree. You got to go through no's to get to the yeses, but you can't take the no's personally. You just can't. And I think for me, the one blessing that I got from my background, I did a lot of network marketing for a while. I sold life insurance for several years. I got used to no's. And I got used to follow-ups, and I had to shift my perspective on that, particularly as it relates to business, as selling being service. And for me, as it relates to what we're doing with women in ministry and doing trauma healing work, I am passionate about what I'm doing because I know it's going to help you. I'm sorry for you saying no because you are missing out. But it's one of those things where it's my responsibility to make this offer to you as an act of service. And if you say no for whatever reason, maybe it's God's timing or not, whatever, you got something else going on, it's not personal. But I did my job by at least extending this opportunity to change your life to you. Right. And so looking at it from that perspective, whether I know you were talking about reaching out to podcast guests, but I think that's just a lesson across the board, not being afraid of the no's and not being afraid to put yourself out there and being someone who is passionate and believes in whatever you're offering as an act of service and doing your work with integrity, not selling what you can't actually fulfill. But if you know you're offering a quality product, then you can have some conviction around that.
where can people find you? Do you want to have like a link to your website or some kind of a social profile, or what are you looking at nowadays?
So 2 main websites I'll send you to find me. One is going to faithonthejourney.org. For any trauma healing stuff, that's been my first website, faithonthejourney.org. And that's on the journey, not a journey. So that we'll find that in the show notes. And you'll learn information about trauma healing groups, Christian counseling, and a number of other resources there. And you can download some free things, and you can see my podcast and stuff there. If you are a sister who wants to start your ministry, visit sisterstartyourministry.com. I got a bunch of free gifts for you. If you're interested in learning about my book, you can find that there. And then I'll also follow up with you with information about my actual community. Paul, I would just say that I would not have made it this far without being a lover of learning and surrounding myself with people who have gone before me. I'm a big proponent of coaching. I've invested at the highest level to learn from some of the best. When I sat in front of you 5-6 years ago in tears because I was freaking out about starting the business, you are looking at a different woman right now as it relates to business. But that's not because of the fact that I'm any different than a listener right now who might be starting from scratch. I had to actually take action and make a lot of mistakes, but also I had to invest in my learning so I could grow, so that now I can speak about marketing efforts and business and things from a place of confidence because I put myself in the room with people who can mentor me and coach me through. So that's my word of advice for anyone who's starting a business. Do not try to do this by yourself. Do not be the smartest person in the room. You want to be around people who are going to call you up, challenge you, help you to handle your mindset issues so that you can stick with what you're working on and help you to fill in the gaps with your business. You need community, so invest in one.